At exactly 12 minutes past noon on a blistering summer day, a bright red nose bobbed through the thick crowd gathered at the town square. Its owner, an iridescently dressed character with baggy polka dot trousers, enormous floppy shoes, and a rainbow wig, hurried along with the determined gait of someone on a very important mission. The clown's name was Giggles, although his expression was often more anxious than jolly, especially on days when he set out to perfect a new routine. And this day, he had decided, was the day to unveil his most daring feat yet: juggling bowling balls in public. Surely, nothing could go wrong with that. Giggles had been a clown for a solid decade, bringing laughter and sometimes confusion to children's birthday parties, company picnics, and the occasional trade show. He prided himself on always pushing the boundaries of clownish entertainment. Not content with the usual apples or rubber chickens, he believed that heavier objects would garner bigger laughs, and what could be heavier and funnier than a set of neon green, regulation-size bowling balls? These bowling balls, though not quite as heavy as the standard black ones at the local bowling alley, were still substantial. Each weighed about 10 pounds, definitely not recommended for novices. But that small detail wouldn't stop Giggles. He had spent the last 2 weeks in his living room feverishly practicing, over the coffee table, around the couches, under the ceiling fan, which was nearly sacrificed multiple times. He had tossed and caught, tossed and caught. Through the many near disasters, he managed a few rotations that gave him confidence. He was sure that with a live audience, he would be extra motivated to get it right. The adrenaline of the performance would override any leftover jitters. At least, that was the plan. So there he was, weaving through the sea of Saturday shoppers in the town square until he found a relatively open spot near a decorative fountain. Skipping around the circular edge, Giggles began to wave his gloved hands in flamboyant arcs, attracting curious bystanders. Within minutes, children who recognized him from previous events started calling out, "Giggles, do your trick!" Some tourists, noticing the crowd's excitement, paused their day's itinerary to watch. And local folks, especially those who recognized the potential for comedic chaos, gathered to see what new stunt the clown had picked as his next big risk. He set down his oversized duffel bag with a dramatic flourish and revealed the neon green bowling balls. A chorus of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Several gasps were audible because juggling pins or balls was one thing. But juggling bowling balls? People either couldn't wait to see this phenomenon or were fearful they might see an ambulance. Either way, the spectacle was about to begin. The clown kicked off with a flamboyant bow. "Ladies, gentlemen, and small humans full of curiosity, behold the wondrous, the stupendous, the absolutely unbelievably unstoppable Giggles the Clown." He adjusted his squeaking bow tie. "Today I shall defy gravity itself by juggling not one, not two, but three bowling balls." He extended the final words for dramatic effect. Stepping onto a small circular mat, he laid down on the pavement. The crowd oohed and awed on cue. With closed eyes, Giggles took a deep breath, his expression momentarily serene, as though he were about to embark on a spiritual journey rather than toss around 20 or 30 pounds of spherical projectiles. Then with a flourish, he bent down, scooped up the first bowling ball, and set it spinning in his right hand. A little flick of his wrist, and the ball twirled precariously. He grabbed the second ball, balancing it on his left palm. Seeing how unsteady both looked, a few in the audience stepped back. Giggles cracked an uneasy grin, wobbling his arms until the balls rested a bit more securely in his gloved hands. Yet the final step was the hardest. He needed to cradle the third ball. Giggles tried hooking the crook of his left elbow around it while maintaining the spin of the first two. From the crowd's vantage point, the scene was reminiscent of someone trying to hold on to 3 watermelons wearing wax-covered mittens. Throughout the onlookers, parents hugged their children closer, and people at the fringes readied themselves to jump out of the way if a bowling ball flew toward them. A hush fell. The moment of truth had arrived. Giggles raised his right arm and lobbed the first ball gently upward. It made a graceful arc and everyone inhaled sharply. Then, with excellent timing, he tossed the second ball and set the third ball in motion. For a glorious instant, all 3 bowling balls soared through the air, weaving a mesmerizing pattern. If it had been a slow-motion cinematic sequence, it might have looked like a masterpiece of artisanal skill. Giggles's mind lit up with triumph. He was actually doing it, except that the second ball started veering just a bit to the right. Maybe he miscalculated the release, maybe it was the wind. Either way, this slight deviation caused the third ball to collide midair with the second ball. In a panic, Giggles made a valiant attempt to catch them, but both collided with his outstretched arms. He let out a squawk, stumbling forward. The first ball, still gracefully falling back to him, bonked him square on the back of the head. The crowd gasped in unison. Giggles wavered on his feet, seeing stars for a moment. He tried to shake it off, adjusting his rainbow wig. Then, as if the balls themselves were outraged at being mishandled, they decided to dance away on their own. One bowled itself across the pavement, weaving between clusters of squealing onlookers. A second one looped around the fountain, nearly toppling an ice cream cone from a stunned child's hand. The third simply rolled in small circles around Giggles' feet, as though mocking him. Recovering, the clown chased after the first two, apologizing profusely as bystanders leapt to safety. Determined to salvage the performance, he lunged after the second ball near the fountain. He almost had it. It was mere inches from his grasp when the toes of his clown shoes, which extended another half-foot beyond his actual feet, tangled around the edges of the fountain's decorative basin. In an elaborate tumble, he soared into the air, arms flailing, and landed with a resounding splash in the water. A wave of droplets showered the spectators, who reacted in a mixture of astonishment and glee. Children giggled hysterically. Some of the adults, concerned that the clown might be injured, approached. Before anyone could properly help him out, Giggles rose with heroic determination, water streaming down his face, wig askew, squeaky nose flopping precariously. Despite the embarrassment, he was not ready to quit. In fact, his showmanship instincts kicked in, and he struck a silly pose as if he had planned this entire fiasco. The crowd burst into laughter. People began clapping, not sure if this was part of the act or a true accident. In the mind of a clown, applause, even if it's out of pity or confusion, is better than stunned silence. Unfortunately, the ball that had spun around the fountain took advantage of Giggles' watery distraction, rolling farther away. He spotted it only for a second as it disappeared behind a group of street vendors selling artisanal cheese and handcrafted jewelry. Determined not to let any of his precious props get lost, he hopped out of the fountain, shoes squelching with each step, and sprinted after it. The crowd followed with curiosity, forming a small stampede. Behind the line of vendors was a narrow lane that led to the local pet adoption fair, temporarily set up under a canopy of bright pink tents. Rows of cages and makeshift pet enclosures were scattered about. Children and adults milled around, cooing at kittens, petting dogs, and feeding carrots to rabbits. That was when, out of nowhere, the bright green sphere trundled through. It veered around a cage of guinea pigs, scaring them into squeaking fits, then bounced off a metal food dish and swerved dangerously close to a group of prospective adoptive parents cradling puppies. Seeing the impending chaos, Giggles made a desperate lunge and clasped the ball in both hands, mere inches from a terrified dachshund's nose. People gasped, but then quickly sighed with relief when they realized the crisis had been averted in the nick of time. Oh, how he wished that was the end of the fiasco! But where were the other two bowling balls? He ran back to the main square, coddling the ball in his arms while scanning for the other missing spheres. By now, the entire audience had scattered into different rumor-driven hunts for the runaway balls. One cluster of onlookers shouted, "It went over there by the coffee cart." Another group pointed toward the big flower bed in front of Town Hall. Meanwhile, the local police officer, who'd been directing traffic at the corner, radioed for backup upon seeing the chaotic clown chase scenario. On the far side of the square sat the iconic coffee cart that served the smoothest cappuccinos in the county. The barista's eyes were wide with alarm as a neon green ball wobbled directly toward a table stacked with paper cups. With comedic timing, Giggles arrived just as the ball rammed into the cart's wheels. The cart lurched, toppling cups and splashing half-made lattes onto the pavement. Giggles skidded to a halt, ball still cradled in one arm, and apologized profusely to the barista, who stared in a mix of disbelief and exasperation. "I'm so sorry," Giggles babbled, setting down the ball he had rescued from the pet fair. "Let me just—" He tried to catch the second ball before it rolled too far, but it escaped his slippery gloves, bouncing lightly off the barista's leg. The barista hopped back, nearly knocking over a tub of milk. The ball then careened off the curb and started rolling down the street, picking up speed with each sidewalk slope. Naturally, Giggles dashed after it. People along the route cried out, jumping aside as the bright green blur zipped past them. The crowd from the fountain and the pet fair started to merge, following the chase, each wanting to see how this clownish fiasco would end. Some were filming the spectacle on their phones, anticipating a viral social media hit. Others were too enthralled by the comedic absurdity to move. Parents held onto their children's hands, ensuring they didn't get in the line of fire. The runaway ball made a beeline for the corner grocery store. With a shriek of dismay, Giggles saw it roll straight through the open doors. It vanished among the produce section. The grocery store, modest in size, had just enough aisles to make searching for a fluorescent bowling ball tricky. Undeterred, Giggles barreled inside, nearly knocking over a tower of canned peas. A startled cashier yelled, "Excuse me, sir?" But by the time she'd spoken, Giggles was already deep amongst the fruits and vegetables. His prolonged, squeaking shoes gave away his position as he zigzagged through aisle 2, cereal and granola bars, nearly tripped by aisle 3, pasta and sauces, and inadvertently knocked over a pyramid of seltzer water cans in aisle 4. The constant whooshing of the store's air conditioning might have whispered a question to Giggles' frazzled brain: when will this end? But he needed to find that ball. Finally, he spotted a row of toppling watermelons, one of them rolling precariously away, and realized that the bowling ball had crashed into the produce display. His heart skipped a beat. Bags of oranges and apples were scattered across the floor, rolling around in a surreal, orchard-themed fiasco. At the epicenter of this fruity chaos sat the bright green ball. It looked almost innocent, as though it had no idea of the destruction it had wrought. Desperate to avoid further damage, Giggles scooped it up. An employee in a green apron approached, frowned at disapproval, and opened his mouth to give the clown a piece of his mind. Giggles, drenched, disheveled, and utterly mortified, folded his hands in apology. I am so sorry. I was doing a show and then—" He glanced around at the scattered produce. "I'll pay for all the damages." A part of him wondered if he had that kind of money. Another part of him wanted to vanish behind a row of toilet paper and pretend none of this had happened. However, the staff seemed relatively sympathetic, if exasperated. Clutching the rescued bowling ball, Giggles stepped outside. A throng of spectators and bystanders had gathered, some still recording the entire fiasco on their phones. Before he could gather his wits, somebody shouted, "I saw the last one rolling by the flower garden." That meant the third, still missing ball might be over by town hall. Summoning what little dignity remained, Giggles rallied himself. He realized he was still dripping from the fountain, still trailing water in a comedic path behind him. But he pressed on, forging toward the flower beds in front of town hall. Upon arriving, he was greeted by the sight of the local gardening club, a small contingent of elderly women wearing sun hats and sturdy gloves. Armed with trowels and knee pads, they had been sprucing up the garden for the upcoming flower festival. The last bowling ball was planted right in the middle of their blooms, half burying itself in the soft soil of a geranium patch. Bent stems and squashed petals formed a sad ring around it. The moment the gardening club noticed Giggles' approach, they simultaneously turned and scowled, as if well practiced in unison scowling. One of them, a petite woman with a floral apron draped over her shoulders, tapped her trowel against her palm. "Young man," she said sternly, "do you mind explaining why a bowling ball has ruined our lovely arrangement?" Her voice quavered with frustration. Giggles, already near the tipping point of total humiliation, tried to muster a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. It slipped away from me. I'll pay for new flowers, new soil, new everything. My apologies." He gently picked up the soiled bowling ball. A few petals stuck to it. One of the gardening club ladies took out a watering can and poured a little over the churned-up earth. as though trying to calm the ruffled geraniums. Holding all three bowling balls at this point was impossible, so he ended up clutching one in each arm while awkwardly tucking the third under his chin. It made breathing and seeing a bit difficult, but at least he had them all. Some onlookers applauded, likely out of relief that the entire fiasco had reached its conclusion. A local policeman, having finally arrived on the scene, approached with an exasperated but not entirely unsympathetic expression. A radio crackled near his shoulder indicated other officers were monitoring the situation from a distance. "Sir," he began calmly, "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." Giggles let out a shaky laugh, mindful not to drop any of the bowling balls onto the policeman's foot. "Yes, of course, officer, yes, I'm so sorry about all of this. It was supposed to be a show. I never meant to cause such chaos." The policeman nodded in understanding. He dealt with all sorts of strange happenings in this town. Escaped goats, spontaneous flash mobs, and the mysterious phenomenon of pizza theft by raccoons. A clown accidentally setting loose bowling balls across the square seemed par for the course. After a few quick back-and-forth questions, during which Giggles provided his contact information and promised to pay for any damages, the officer let him off with a friendly warning. "No more public juggling of heavy objects without a safer plan, okay?" Giggles nodded, humbled to the core. The policeman then turned to the still hovering crowd. "All right, folks, show's over. Please continue with your day. Let's give this clown some space to recover." In the aftermath, some store owners expectedly demanded compensation. The grocery store manager insisted in a scolding tone, "We're not a bowling alley," prompting Giggles to nod vigorously and reiterate his willingness to cover the cost of any damaged merchandise. The barista from the coffee cart offered a sad smile and a handshake, empathizing with the unpredictability of daily life. "At least you gave us something to talk about for the rest of the summer," he joked. The local veterinarian who had a booth at the pet fair came by to confirm no animals were harmed, though many had been frightened. Giggles apologized to everyone he could find, eventually shaking so many hands that his gloves began to wear thin at the edges. Then came the tricky part, figuring out how exactly to carry the three heavy bowling balls home. He had brought them in a duffel bag, but in the frantic chase, that bag had been left near the fountain. By the time he returned, the bag had vanished, likely tossed aside in the confusion, or maybe carried away by a good Samaritan who feared it would cause more mayhem. So there he was, slogging through the streets, sopping wet, weighed down by three green bowling balls. Every step made his clown shoes squish and squeak. He must have been quite a sight to passers-by. An exhausted clown in a drooping wig, looking like he'd just been through a war, trudging home with his comedic burden. Few people offered him rides or asked if he needed help carrying them, but he insisted on taking responsibility himself. With that came a measure of dignity, as if silently proclaiming, "I made this mess, so I'll do my own heavy lifting out of it." An elderly woman from the gardening club caught up with him, gave him a paper bag of fresh cookies, and said, "You did ruin the geraniums, but I trust you'll help us replant. In the meantime, have something sweet." Giggles accepted with genuine gratitude, the cookies comforting him a little on the long trek back. Several blocks later, he finally arrived at his modest apartment complex. After fumbling with his keys, no easy task with arms full of bowling balls, he liberated himself from the evidence of the day's fiasco. He set them in a corner of his living room as carefully as if they were bombs about to detonate. Then he peeled off his wig, his soggy gloves, and soaked clown outfit. Stepping out of the squeaking shoes last, exhaustion sank in, and he collapsed onto his threadbare couch. For a moment, he considered the comedic highlight reel of what had happened. The fountain tumble, the pet adoption near disaster, the coffee cart fiasco, the grocery store chaos, and of course, the geranium patch. As the embarrassment welled up, Giggles realized that in the course of trying to put on the most daring, hilarious act, he might have overlooked the value of simpler, safer approaches. He didn't need to juggle bowling balls to ignite laughter. Maybe he could stick to something less destructive like rubber chickens or perhaps oversized plush toys. But then again, he was Giggles, a clown with big aspirations. Maybe, just maybe, if he practiced more scrupulously responsibly, he could attempt it again someday, but certainly not in the bustling town square without better safety measures. An hour later, after a warm bath and a change into normal clothes, he found himself rummaging for paper and pen. Writing out an apology and an itemized damage list was the next step. He owed both the grocery store and the coffee cart owners enough money to crinkle his clownish budget, not to mention the donation he wanted to give to the pet fair for the fright they endured, and the cost of replanting the geraniums for the gardening club. The sums would be painful, but reputation was priceless. He would send thank you notes too for the people who helped in small ways, like the barista who kept him from completely losing face, or the officer who handled the chaos with calm professionalism. Retaining a sense of humor in times like these was crucial. Once the final note was written, he allowed himself a rueful chuckle, imagining how the entire fiasco might look edited into a comedic short film. Perhaps someone in the crowd got it all on camera. That footage might already be swirling around social media, gathering laughter and digital applause. The thought made him grin sheepishly. As humiliated as he felt, the fact that folks might be bonding over a shared comedic moment brought him comfort. After all, laughter was what clowns lived for. The next day, he picked up the local paper. Sure enough, there was a brief article on page 2. Clown bowling ball bonanza sparks chaos at town square. Even the headline made him cringe. The subheading read, "No serious injuries, but plenty of laughs." That last part lifted his spirits. Maybe he'd redeem himself in the public's eyes by repaying damages and improving his act. He made a mental note to write a letter to the editor, apologizing in print and thanking the community for their patience. He pictured signing it with a little doodle of a clown face wearing an embarrassed smile. In spite of everything, he felt a strange surge of determination. His near disaster had inadvertently showcased the essence of who he was, a clown who believed in dreaming big, sometimes too big for his own good. Mistakes could happen. That was part of live performance. The important part was making amends and learning a lesson. Perhaps the next time he attempted a stunt, he would test it within a controlled environment, with spotters and safety nets, or at the very least, lighter foam replica bowling balls. The fiasco had taught him humility, awareness, and the comedic potential of mishaps, especially when wearing clown shoes. A few weeks later, on a pleasantly warm morning, a group of passers-by paused on the sidewalk just outside the park near the pet fair grounds. Giggles was there again, in full clown attire, except this time he wasn't juggling anything heavier than a couple of plush juggling balls that squeaked with each toss. He hopped in place a couple of times and then began a careful, measured juggling routine. Onlookers recognized him and whispered among themselves, was this courageous or foolish? He started slow, adding dramatic movements but never losing focus on the squeaky plush orbs. Each soared through the air in graceful arcs, never straying more than a foot from his waiting hands. The time he'd spent practicing simpler objects clearly paid off. At the grand finale, he caught all 3 squeaky balls, balancing them on his arms in a playful maneuver. Then he bowed, top hat in hand, revealing his colorful wig. Applause erupted, small yet sincere. Some folks teased him with lighthearted banter. No more bowling balls, right? He laughed, stood up proudly, and took it in stride. Juggling plush, squeaky balls might not have been as bold or headline-grabbing as neon green bowling balls, but at least it didn't send him crashing into fountains or grocery stores. Most importantly, the fiasco had reminded him of why he donned the red nose in the first place: to make people smile. It wasn't about defying weight limits or setting records for the heaviest juggled item. It was about the delight in a child's eyes, the goofy grin on a parent's face, the communal act of sharing in silliness. He might never live down the bowling ball bonanza, but in the grand tapestry of clown lore, sometimes the best stories come from the biggest bloopers. And whenever the memory of that chaotic day surfaced, Giggles consoled himself with the fact that at least nobody got seriously hurt, except perhaps his pride and a patch of geraniums in the town hall garden. With a final wave to the small audience in the park, Giggles hopped off his makeshift stage, plush balls safely tucked under his arm. He wandered home, taking in the sunny day and greeting townspeople he passed. A few kids ran up to him, giggling about the fiasco as though it were a grand comedic legend. He obliged them, retelling the story in exaggerated form, claiming the bowling balls had minds of their own, rolling off in pursuit of city landmarks. The children squealed at every twist and turn, living vicariously through his misadventure. In that moment, Giggles realized a profound truth. Not every plan goes smoothly, especially in the world of clownery. But if you embrace the chaos, transform it into laughter, and ensure no one is harmed, you've done your job as a clown. Sometimes it's the flops, the embarrassing pratfalls, and the runaway bowling balls that create the fondest memories and the most heartfelt humor. And so he continued home, stepping carefully to keep the squeaky plush from tumbling away, cherishing the silver lining of a thoroughly bungled performance that, in its own wild way, fulfilled its purpose, spreading big, unstoppable smiles.